Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you had good sessions. I'm sure you enjoyed lunch as well. Our first session this afternoon is a newsmaker interview with someone who served as US Secretary of State and since early 2021 has been the US Presidential Envoy for Climate. 6 years ago, he signed the Paris Agreement with his 2-year-old granddaughter on his lap. He knows that she's old enough today to ask the tough questions that she and other children her age care so deeply about, the future of our planet. He knows this crisis is existential, and he made it his existence. Please welcome to the stage the US Presidential Envoy for Climate, Secretary of State, former Secretary of State and former Senator John Kerry, and Nick Clark, the environmental editor of Al Jazeera English, who will be conducting this interview.
Good afternoon, everybody. Great to be here. John Kerry, Presidential Envoy for Climate. Thank you for talking to Al Jazeera here at the Doha Forum. We'll get into the nitty-gritty of and the whys and wherefores of climate policy in just a second. But, Mr. Kerry, you know, I remember, I think it's 2014, the climate summit in Peru, in Lima. And I was walking along the corridors and I heard these refrains of happy birthday being sung by your team to you. And at that point, you were, if you'll forgive me for saying, you were 70 years old. And if we do the maths, a lot of people at this point...
Please don't.
A lot of people at this point would be enjoying a relaxed retirement. So what is it about this particular mission that's driving you on?
Well, Gita mentioned it. Grandchildren, children, and the fate of the planet. I mean, nothing less is at stake. And it's hard in the midst of Ukraine, where, let me just say very quickly, Putin is waging not just an illegal, unprovoked war, but an evil, horrendous war that is the worst thing I've seen. And I fought in a war, but it's the worst thing I've seen since I've seen clips of what happened in World War II. And it really rises to a level of bestiality and personal cravenness that all of us should be pushing back against in every way that we possibly know how. That said, we face another crisis, which is existential. And if it is existential, which I believe it is, and many people here, Mary Robbins and others know it is, we are not yet responding globally in a way that manifests that we care that it is existential. So that's why I'm involved in this. I've been doing this since 1988 when we first heard scientist Jim Hansen testify to us in Congress that it was already happening. And I went to Rio with Al Gore and a whole bunch of other people, and we fought for an agreement. We had an agreement. It was voluntary. Nobody did anything. We went to Kyoto. We went to countless meetings, including Buenos Aires and Copenhagen, and finally Paris, where I had an opportunity to weigh in and have, I hope, some impact, and again in Glasgow. And in Glasgow, we proved, through all the things that we did, getting 65% of global GDP committed to real plans that could achieve 1.5 degree limit, which Fatih Birol in the IEA, I was just in Paris with him, and they have reaffirmed that if everybody does what they promised to do in Paris, we could actually hold the Earth's temperature to 1.8 degrees by 2050. The problem is we're not doing everything we promised to do, and we're still back in 2-point-something degrees, and that is absolutely catastrophic. So we must manage, we human beings must manage two crises at the same time.
Right.
Ukraine and climate.
And the crisis of the climate is being made more difficult now by Ukraine.
Well,
everything's being reshaped, isn't it?
In some ways, Nick, but not sure about every way.
I was just going to say, because you already alluded to it, we're well behind the mark already on where we need to be with climate. Do you worry that the ongoing conflict is going to set us back further?
I do. I worry But as I was just saying, I'm not convinced that we know the answer to that question yet. It's clear that in Europe, they have decided to double down on the single strongest thing you can do about Putin's stranglehold on fuel for Europe, which is get off the fuel. And so Belgium has doubled down. They're going to be dealing with keeping a nuclear plant open longer than they anticipated. France is doubling down on nuclear. Germany has decided to speed up the transition on renewables. Denmark is speeding up. Netherlands is speeding up. And already in the United States, we're seeing a great deal more effort being put into moving away from the gas, and we have a goal of a 50% reduction. So here's where we stand. The scientists, first of all, we're not doing what we're doing because a leader of a country has said we have to do this. President Biden, myself, others. We're doing this because the best scientists in the world, repeatedly over 30 years, and now more dramatically, are telling us unequivocally that we have X number of years, it happens to now be down to 8, approximately, to make the critical decisions and implement them to avoid the worst consequences of the climate crisis. So let me emphasize to everybody, that is not to avoid the crisis. It's to avoid the worst consequences of the crisis. And that's only avoidable if we cut emissions by 45% between now and 2030. So we have, as I said, 65% of global GDP. There are 20 countries, make it simple, there are 20 countries that equal 80% of all emissions. Those 20 countries happen to be the 20 largest economies of the world. They are also members of a thing called MEF, the Major Economies Forum. And 12 of those countries are on a track to be able to hold on to 1.5 degrees. The problem is there are 8 others, and then more close to them underneath it, who are not. And you know who they are. They're the largest economies: China, Russia, India, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, Mexico, Brazil, South Africa. South Africa, Indonesia, India, and Mexico have made major decisions to rapidly try to transition. And we are working very closely with each of them. We actually worked with them prior to Glasgow. So they've raised their ambition. South Africa, we have $8.5 billion to try to help South Africa begin to get off of coal. Indonesia has made a commitment to get off of coal, but they need technology and money. Mexico has made a fascinating decision through President Lopez Obrador, where we're working with them to actually try to get 50% renewables deployed in the next 8 to 10 years, get them to tap into their geothermal, and they have terrific wind and solar in the south of the country. So then you have India. India has made a commitment to deploy 450 gigawatts of renewable, and we're working as a partner with India to try to help them do that. Again, they need technology and they need finance. And the key here is getting that. Now, in Glasgow, many of you may remember the so-called GFANs, the Glasgow Financial Asset Managers, and many and other efforts. Mark Carney worked hard on this, and others. We've pulled together well over $100 trillion of investable finance that's ready to commit to this transition. But that's not giveaway money. It's not concessionary. And it will look for a return on the investment, as it should, and particularly in the case of pension funds and other things. So what we, the global community, need to do now is make sure there are bankable projects that you can bring to the table that will deploy those trillions of dollars. And why is that critical? Because everything suggests, more than suggests, it compels that we must invest in this transition. And the UN report on finance says there is a deficit of between $2.5 and $4.5 trillion per year for the next 30 years. No government in the world has the money to do that. So the only way we solve this problem, my friends, is the importance of the Doha Forum. It's the importance of every meeting we have now. The only way we get to where we have to go to prevent trillions of dollars of damage that far exceeds the money we need to invest, and every analysis shows that, the only way we get there is by getting the private sector fully invested in that transition, which means we need to be more creative. We need to have blended finance. We've met with Jeff Bezos, Mike Bloomberg, Rockefeller Foundation, others. We need to release some money as concessionary money to use as leverage to get additional funds committed based on assuming a certain amount of risk, reducing that first risk, and making it tenable for those investable funds to make the decision to deploy. That's how we win.
Right. It's a clarion call, but not everybody is listening. That's the case, isn't it? I mean,
you know, actually, I think a lot of people are listening. I think they're not responding.
Okay, all right, not responding. But if we come back to Ukraine again, I'm not going to get into US policy on Ukraine because it's not your remit. But on the climate, that is. Because there are many oil majors, many companies, oil majors included, who are now re-examining their climate pledges. I mean, look at Shell and the Cambo oil field in the North Sea. And this latest agreement, just in the last couple of days, between the US and the EU to supply, for the United States to supply LPG to the EU, they're going to need to build infrastructure. And as we know, infrastructure projects last decades. It's going in the wrong direction.
Well, it depends on the decisions that get made, and we've had this discussion very clearly in Washington in the last days with respect to this EU decision and beyond it. So let me share with you what I believe is unvarnished truth. Some may not like it, but this is the only way we get there. Last year, we succeeded in getting China to say they will not fund any coal plants externally. And the world is moving away from coal, not just because people in climate work like myself are saying coal's the dirtiest fuel and we don't abate it and you can't do it, but because the marketplace is deciding it no longer is that viable. They haven't decided that, obviously, on gas, certainly oil. But I've talked, I mean, I had a meeting with the energy minister here today, and we talked about this, and he understands completely and is committed to making sure that the emissions from the burning of gas and or oil are captured. Now, we have about an 8-year period here where we can begin to move to put in place the carbon capture, carbon pricing for those who accept that. We have to move to...
Yeah, both of those are controversial, though, aren't they? A lot of people don't go there.
Carbon capture is not, I don't think that's as controversial. The question is...
as a solution, as a potential solution.
Well, yeah, because it costs money to deploy the infrastructure to do it. But if it comes to the point where you do that or you spend trillions of dollars more to build seawalls that won't last very long and to try to adapt and prevent floods from destroying farms and growing land all around the world. And by the way, there's another problem that compounds this, which this region really understands, and that's called extreme heat. We are seeing, yesterday, folks, just to give you a heads up, in Arctic yesterday and the day before and the day before, it was 70 degrees Fahrenheit, 30 degrees centigrade above normal. In the Antarctic, it was 100 degrees Fahrenheit above normal, and that's what, 40 degrees or so plus. I talked to a scientist at the Potsdam Institute. Many of you may have heard of him, Johan Rockström. He's a terrific scientist. He's one of the most respected people in the world on this subject. And I asked him the other day, what are you most afraid of right now in terms of the evidence? And he said, afraid that we have passed 3 tipping points from which there's no reversibility. And he said, that's the danger. This is irreversible in the Arctic, in the Antarctic, and the coral reefs. Now, you see the temperatures, you can make your own judgment as a person who wants to I hope, utilize the precautionary principle of governing, which would suggest that since last year was the hottest year in recorded history, with the hottest day in recorded history, the hottest month in recorded history, and was preceded by the second hottest decade in history, which was preceded by the third hottest decade in history, you would think, as public people, we begin to say, whoa, that may be a trend. Maybe something's happening we should respond to, which is added on to by the fact that the scientists are all telling us, if you don't respond to these things, it's going to get worse. 10 million people a year die from air pollution, which is principally greenhouse gases. Those greenhouse gases go into the ocean. 90% of the excess heat of the planet goes into the ocean. And the chemistry of the ocean is now changing faster than it has in our recorded memory. Faster than it has, according to scientific understanding, in millions of years. And the acidification of the ocean, which comes from the CO2 that then rains into the ocean, is changing the chemistry even further, which will affect fish stocks, affect mangrove growth, and all the other buffers that we have. So we're literally on a track to kill ourselves over a period of time, other than those who have the most money in the world. People who have a certain amount of money will probably, not all people are going to suddenly feel the same effects. But that's another problem for the planet, because in Africa, you could have the implosion of the capacity of Africa to produce food because of the extreme heat and the lack of water. And that is an absolute scientific prediction. It's not a John Kerry pull-it-out-of-the-sky statement. So what happens then? You have tens of millions of refugees wandering the planet, knocking on the door of places that are livable. And we've already seen what happens with mass migration as a result of conflict. So I believe, I don't want to sound, this is not a triteism, but we're playing with fire. We're seeing fire consuming huge proportions of countries, and we've got to change it. It's changeable. That's what's exciting. I'm sorry to go on, but this is winnable. That's what's so frustrating. And I was in California last week. I went out there because I wanted to see how winnable it is. I was at Stanford. I went to the Google X. I met with, thanks to Mark Benioff at Salesforce, we got about 15 really exciting startups. I saw a battery that gets 100 hours. I saw a new lithium process that will not require us to all have a lithium mine or access. We'll be able to continue to build electric vehicles. I saw carbon capture direct that creates a product, including, say, sustainable aviation fuel. There are a host of these technologies which, if we put enough money and effort into them in these next years, I'm really convinced we're going to win this battle, but we got to do it and get more of it.
I note we're running out of time. Just one final question. Here in the Middle East, we have nations built on the petrodollar. How should these nations be planning for the future?
Diversifying, thinking not only about being an oil and gas company, but be an energy company. And they are doing that. I mean, I know that Saudi Arabia is thinking about a massive hydrogen capacity fueled by solar that will drive the electrolyzers that can produce the green hydrogen that can then, this is doable, folks. In fact, we're looking at the potential, not the potential, the reality. It'll happen. The only issue is, will it happen fast enough? And what's going to happen is there will be new methodologies that are found to deal with the problems, which some people haven't wanted to deal with. Take heavy industry, steel, aluminum, shipping. Shipping, if it were a country, would be the 8th largest emitter on the planet. So we got Maersk to step up in Glasgow and join something called the First Movers Coalition. And we have a host of companies, 37 of them now, including Amazon, Boeing, Delta, Salesforce, Apple, Volvo, Maersk. Volvo has decided that 10% of the steel they purchase in order to make their cars will now be green, no matter what. And they're doing it. Maersk has said the next 8 ships we build are going to be carbon-free. I mean, this is what's happening. Lafarge Holcim is producing green cement. And people are buying the cement not just because it's green, but because it's clean, it's better cement than the cement they've had previously. So things like that are evolving that I think are profoundly impactful. And secondly, as I said with the energy minister here, it's not the gas per se that is the problem. It's not the oil per se that is the problem. It's the byproduct of the way we choose to use them. So if you can come up with the way to use them and capture those emissions and do something with them, you may have a virtuous future that is not going to be absent that product. So that's the transition we're in. This is the biggest market. The energy market is the largest market the world has ever known. Think of that. In Massachusetts, which I was privileged to represent in the Senate for 28 years, including Harvard and MIT, and as a Yale man, I hesitate to mention Harvard, but we do. But the huge, 136 colleges and universities, they're all pushing forward with an understanding that this transition is dependent on technology and transition. We had an incredible upsurge in 1990s because of personal telephones and desktops, right? Technology. Millions of millionaires were created, a lot of millionaires, a lot of money was made, but it was only a $1 trillion market with about 1 billion users. We're looking at a multi-trillion-dollar already existing market in the double digits somewhere, with 4.5 to 5 billion users already, rising to 9 to 10 billion in the next 30 years. And you can debate how great that is, but that's what's going to happen. If that's a marketplace that will demand clean energy, and therefore you're going to see an enormous amount of growth here, huge development, huge investment. I already see, I think there's about $1 trillion now of venture capital that has moved in the last couple of years into these sectors. It's already making a difference, but you can't bet on it, which means you must be deploying now as much of the existing technology as we have, which is what the IEA says we should do, which means solar, wind, geothermal, hydro, nuclear, a lot of things. If we were to deploy more of it more rapidly, we win this battle.
Right. We'll have to leave it there. Time is up. John Kerry, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much indeed, Secretary Kerry. Thank you, Nick, for this insightful conversation, which, of course, continues to raise that perennial nagging question. How do you get countries to get off the fuel, as Secretary Kerry says, to get off the coal, when, let's face it, we also face a new reality, in many respects a paradox, which takes us from this session on climate action to energy transition and security, which is the focus of our next panel. And when you consider that just barely 4 months ago, at the last COP meeting in Glasgow, the focus was on how to transition to greener energy and to reduce hydrocarbons from our energy mix. That was the leitmotif. Today, it seems to be how do we increase natural gas and oil output to stabilize markets. So when you consider that, you consider just how intertwined and interdependent our world is, but also how very, very whimsical it can be as well. To maybe counter my claims, it is my pleasure to invite to the stage our panelists, His Excellency Saad Sharid Al-Kaabi, the Minister of State for Energy Affairs and President and CEO of Qatar Energy, Patrick Pouyanné, Chairman and CEO of Total Energies, Amos Hochstein, Senior Advisor for Energy Security at the US State Department, Anders Opedal, President and CEO of Equinor, and Hadley Gamble of CNBC, who will be moderating this session.
Good afternoon, everybody. Once again, my name is Hadley Gamble. I am CNBC's chief international correspondent and anchor based in Abu Dhabi. Energy is one of the many things that I have the privilege of covering, everywhere from Moscow to Dubai to right here in Doha, and certainly over the weekend in Belgium as well, where we saw this historic agreement between the United States and EU partners to attempt to create a situation where they are able, they hope in the short to medium term, to wean themselves off of Russian gas. I want to welcome to the stage our panelists, His Excellency Saad Al-Kaabi. He is, of course, the Minister of Energy Affairs and the President and CEO of Qatar Energy. Patrick Pouyanné, the Chairman and CEO of Total Energies. And Andres Opedal, the President and CEO of Equinor. Gentlemen, welcome, and thank you so much to the Doha Forum for having us all. I want to kick off with His Excellency, and just to get a sense from you in terms of the mechanics, the market dynamics of what we're seeing, because as I mentioned, the United States, the EU partners have decided on a historic agreement. We're talking about 15 billion cubic meters of natural gas, liquefied natural gas, LNG, to Europe in order to wean them from Russian gas. Can you just give us a sense, sir, of how much of that number is going to be made up of supplies from Qatar?
First, I'd like to thank the organizers for such a great conference, and we've heard some great discussions here, and a pleasure to be with such a distinguished panel and yourself after such a long time of being online, most of us, I guess. I think, 15 billion cubic feet a day is quite a large number, and I think to actually accomplish that, you need many players around the world. Qatar is one of the players, one of the major suppliers of LNG to the world, and definitely we have been planning to actually supply Europe for some time. We bought capacity in Zeebrugge Terminal, in Montois, in France, Isle of Grain, in the UK. We own a terminal or partially own a terminal in Italy, in Rovigo. We own a terminal in the UK, South Hook, with our colleagues Total. So we've been working on bringing more volume into Europe, whether it's the terminal capacity, in addition to announcing that we're going to go from 77 million tons to 126 million tons from Qatar, in addition to a project that we're working on from the US, which will bring 60 million tons, destined really for Europe, because that's the destination that we intended it for, that will be online by 2024-25. So a lot of volume will be coming, but 15 billion needs many more players to be part of that.
Yeah. When I spoke with your foreign minister just a few moments ago, I asked him about this specifically, and he essentially said, we have long-term contracts and we have commitments to be a seller of energy and a producer of energy that is consistent to those needs of our customers. But when you think about this a bit more broadly, do you believe that the state of emergency that we see today in Europe is such that you could potentially attempt to move those contracts or change them?
You see, there are two things. One was your question about the commitment of weaning down or coming off some of the supplies and bringing a new 15 billion cubic feet a day. So that's a fresh production or fresh volume, if you will, coming into the US. So my answer was really tuned towards that. If your question now, I believe you said that you're talking about today, what can Qatar do? So as far as today is concerned, the majority of our volume is already destined to certain markets, including Europe, where it's long-term, non-divertible volume, like in Italy and some other destinations. But the majority is going, probably 85% is going to Asia. The ones that are actually, the volumes that are going to to Europe, like most of the sellers to Europe, are volumes that go to hub, based pricing, and these are divertible volumes. So what we've committed as Qatar is that during this situation with Ukraine, we're not going to divert away from Europe, although we have the contractual right to do that. So that volume is quite small in comparison to the needs of the 15. And I think even the Europeans and the discussion with the Americans on what they said they would do, it would take probably another 7 years to achieve that, or 5 to 7 years, I think is what they talked about. It won't be something that's immediate. But immediately, I don't think we can help, and nobody can replace. I've said this very clearly. The volume that we're talking about, 30 to 40% of gas coming from Russia to Europe, is not something that can be replaced overnight. It needs time, but it also needs the international companies such as Total and Shell and Exxon and Equinor to have their governments or the European governments be a promoter of oil and gas companies investing, not demonizing oil and gas companies as has been the case the last few years.
Patrick, I'd love to weigh in with you on this one, because when we think about what we've heard over the last 24 hours from Europe, I attended that meeting. I finally had to leave because it went on for hours and hours, because there's such a disagreement between various nations about what should be done in an attempt to wean Europe from Russian gas. But I want to ask you about this idea of the collective buying power of Europe. What do you see that means for pricing? Because the entire idea of this is that they could get a better price from producers.
I think the basic idea is, in fact, the way the European market is working, it's a spot market. It's a strange, we're a continent with a deficit. We import. Norway is one of the producers, but we import. And today we have decided to be in a spot-free market, a hub, like His Excellency was saying. And with little storage and not enough regas capacities. That's the problem we face today. I think the idea is maybe we should move to longer-term contracts, long-term contracts. And you know that the Commission, in particular the antitrust body, was against, because we were afraid that some long-term contract would advantage some industrials from Germany against industrials. So that's the key issue. What I said to the French authorities, if you want to stabilize the gas price, you need to accept somewhere. First, you need to have more storage. Second, more regas terminals, more access to the continent because you have a deficit. And third, do like they've done in Asia, in Japan, in China today, where you have some long-term contracts. Of course, it's national companies that SAD is facing. It's not private companies. But you need to have some long-term contracts, which will obviously, when I'm signing a long-term contract, I'm accepting to have a sort of floor, a sort of ceiling, and so the price is not the same than going on the spot market. So this is a way to stabilize. And I think the idea to do it all together, I just want to understand who will sign the contract. Is it the EU Commission? Where is the commercial capacity? We've done that for vaccines, so it's not impossible. But I think it's the idea that I know that the German minister came here and the others were not very happy to see that each country, I think, in fact, today we are in a war. So if we want to find a solution, we should be together and not trying to be selfish, I think. But for me, the fundamental idea is long-term. Let's accept to inject long-term, which suppose, and back to I was listening to John Kerry, that Europe accept to consider gas as a long-term transition fuel. Because if they told us, you invest, you sign a 20-year contract with Qatar, but maybe in 10 years we will tell you that we don't need the gas, I'm not a philanthropy business, It was the famous expression of Minister Alatia in the past, but it's not my job, So we have to reconcile the security of supply, the pricing, and the climate. And I think this is, for me, an historic period, where suddenly we've seen we are mainly driven by climate in the last 5 years for fundamental reason, but sometimes we forget that energy is a triangle. Security of supply, pricing, and climate. And we must find the right balance, and I'm convinced, this is a strategy of TotalEnergies, that gas is part of this transition, because it gives a flexibility to move from coal to renewable, to a full decarbonized energy system. But that's the fundamental question. If you want to attract investors, you need to give them a future. In energy, we work on 15 and 20 years, horizon.
So that EU planning that we got after several hours of their meeting was essentially, in your view, big on ideas but short on detail.
Exactly. So, and in energy business, as we speak about billions of euros, the details are much more important sometimes than the concept, But why not? Let's work now, and I'm ready. I mean, TotalEnergies is a large corporate company. We control 40% of the access of regas terminals in Europe. We've said, I think together we have almost a big share of it. No, but I mean, so we are a big player, largest exporter for energy from the US, by the way. we have a large food forward for this, so I'm ready to work on it to find the solution. We are a European company and we exchange with the European authorities, but now we need to work and to know, by the way, who will be the counterpart. We need to know to who will speak, you know. Do I speak to the French government, to the European Commission? That will be it. But let's work, let's work.
Anders, I want to ask you specifically about what we were just hearing from America's climate envoy, John Kerry. He was talking about not just the crisis in Ukraine, but also the crisis of climate. For you as a producer and one who is very heavily involved in renewables, how damaging is the Russia-Ukraine crisis to the transition to clean energy?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And first of all, thank you very much for being invited to Doha. I really appreciate coming down here and being a part of such a panel. Let me just start, you know, where Mr. Poirier mentioned, you know, the triangle that we need to solve. And basically, we have been going from crisis and crisis in terms of the debate recently. You know, 9 months ago, we talked about Code Red and the IPCC report and kind of no more exploration wells to be drilled, no more producing fields. And then we're starting to see the supply crunch for gas in Europe, and everyone started to talk about pricing and affordability. And now it's about energy security. I think the triangle, the trilemma that Patrick mentioned here is really what we need to look at in the long term. How can we be able to provide affordable energy, increase the renewable energy, and we are, you know, in offshore wind, we are in solar, and how can we also kind of decarbonize both the upstream oil and gas, but also help our customers to decarbonize how they use our energy. And if we are able to think long-term on these elements, although we have a very volatile market at the moment, I think we are able to kind of do what the Secretary Kerry said in his speech. But of course, we are in a war situation now, so now it's about finding some of the short-term solutions to ensure that people get the energy, and particularly it's important to ensure that we are not moving from an energy crisis into a food crisis.
And frankly, inflation and a crisis of confidence. We're seeing that already in Europe. We're seeing that elsewhere. I want to ask Your Excellency how you see this crisis with Ukraine and Russia accelerating the move to alternative formats of payment for energy, not just gas, but also oil. We saw a report in the Wall Street Journal last week that Saudi Arabia could potentially be considering oil contracts based in yuan. We heard from the Russian president demanding that anybody who would buy Russian energy should pay in Russian rubles. Do you anticipate that this crisis is accelerating the move to alternative forms of payment, potentially even cryptocurrency?
I think this is a reaction based on a war situation, and I don't think you can base a long-term plan and mechanism of how the oil and gas business and the financial sector attached to that works with the short-term events. So I think this is just something that's happening as a reaction, but I don't think it will change the long-term way that we have been dealing and we will be dealing in the future. So I don't think it will fundamentally change the way we have been doing it. But I think if I can just elaborate on something my colleague here and friend Patrick said regarding, you know, the stark difference between dealing with Europe and dealing with Asia. I've talked to many, as you know, many politicians have been knocking the door of Qatar in this crisis, and it's exactly what Patrick said, is in Asia you're dealing with either government-owned companies or government-controlled companies, whereas in the entire Europe, really, you're just dealing with governments that are telling, they were just a few months ago telling companies, you're bad boys and we don't want you, and oil and gas is bad, and now they're asking them to go and buy products and bring on more products. So fundamentally, the price shift that has happened, it's 5 years of lack of investments in oil and gas that has caused the spike and that people are complaining about in oil prices and gas prices. And then Ukraine issue, of course, amplified that.
Patrick, I want to ask you specifically, you mentioned infrastructure and the long-term projects that are going to have to be built out for years in order to reach the capacity that's needed. When I spoke with Olaf Scholz last week, the Chancellor of Germany, he basically said to me that before we can even talk about Russian energy sanctions from Europe, he's got to get LNG terminals built in Germany. They have no way to bring that LNG into the country at this point. When you take a step back and think about the prices we're seeing of energy in Europe, given the amount of infrastructure that they're going to have to put in place, when can we expect energy prices, in your view, to begin to go back to more acceptable levels?
First, we need to stop to have the debate. Because, you know, today this debate about the Russian gas, do we keep it, don't we keep it, is just pushing every day the price up. So my advice to our government was, okay, you decide. Either you keep it or you don't keep it. My first comment. Having said that, it is also very clear to me that the gas price in Europe will be higher tomorrow than it was yesterday. You know, because yesterday, this Russian gas was giving us a base of 30–40% of low-cost gas in Europe. So Europe was benefiting from the Russian gas, let's be clear, compared to LNG. LNG, from the US to Europe, it started from its landing in Europe at minimum at $7 per million BTU. You know, it's just a question of chain. So Russian gas is produced at 1 and 2. So obviously, so now this time will be over because I'm convinced whatever will happen, we'll get rid of the Russian gas. Not today. It will take 2, 3, 4 years to build the infrastructure, then to find the LNG, because you don't build a new LNG plant on the planet. You can ask Saad, he's an expert of it, it takes 5 years. So we don't have, so even if we decide today, new supply will have to be built. But the consequence of all that is that clearly the gas price in Europe will be higher than it was. So the $5 that we experienced, or the free $5, I think game is over. We'll go above 10. Today we are nowhere. We are at $30 per million BTU, which is much too high. But as you said, it's a crisis. But you know, fundamentally, we will manage to get the price back if we accept that gas is part of the European mix. Otherwise, again, the investors will be prudent, and we will have always a problem of demand and supply. This is what is happening today. You know, there is a debate. I was listening to John Kerry. Yes, we need to build a new decarbonized system. It's $300. It will take years. But the mistake we are doing altogether is that we want at the same time to destroy the energy of today, not to invest enough in oil and gas. We cannot do that for the next 10, 15 years. We must heavily invest in renewables, in hydrogen, in all these new molecules, yes. But at the same time, we must maintain the system because our life today is done of oil and gas. And so what we've done in the last 5 years, because of crisis, we invested not enough. The price went up. The war is just adding on it. So if we want to be serious, if we want to put back the gas price in Europe, it's a matter, again, of long-term policy. Do we accept, to get all together in Europe, that gas is a transition fuel and that we will need it for the next 20, 25 years? Then investors will come and you will see price will go back, will go down. But you know, I'm excited because for me, I'm the number 2. No, I would say number 3 because number 1 is just beside me. Number 2 among the private oil and gas company in the LNG business. We have 10% of the world market. A new market is open to us. It's called Europe. We know so the world can change. So we are lucky today, you know. We have some issues with some of our plants, but we've seen this new market. But it will be, LNG is fundamentally more expensive than pipe gas.
Yeah.
So the one who will win is on my left.
Patrick, I want to ask you, though, to walk us through something. So Total Energies at this point has said that you are working towards a gradual suspension of activities in Russia. I want you to take this moment to clarify the mechanics of all of this, because essentially what we've seen is your competitors having written off their Russian investments, and I'm talking to the tune of billions of dollars. I'm talking about BP, I'm talking about Shell. Are you prepared to say that the business that you still have in Russia is worthless?
I mean, written off does not mean that you leave a country. Huh? Written off is just a decision in your account to say these assets are worth nothing. We do not consider, today they're worth nothing, because today they have no buyer, for sure. But you know, when you have, like me, $13 billion of assets, I have a duty with my shareholders to take care of the future of these assets. So clearly, what we said, and we are totally committed, we apply all the sanctions, we will not put a single new capital in Russia. The question for us is, what do we do with the existing assets? And these ones, I'm not ready to give them for zero to Russian people, to Russian oligarchs, or to Russian, because by the way, it will be the contrary of the sanctions.
But does that mean you consider working with President Putin in the future?
No way.
A man that is
considered
by the U.S. president to be
No. I just told you that we'll do what I just say. It's not a matter of, no, we'll not work with President Putin. I don't think that's clear. But make a difference, please, between Russia and President Putin. I think you have a Russian population today which will suffer as well from the sanction. But again, for me, it's a question of accountability and responsibility vis-à-vis their shareholders and stakeholders. These assets are there. I will not give them for free to Mr. Putin. Because this is what it means, living today. I'm giving my shares, I'm giving my plans. They will be super happy, my Russian partners, you know?
So you think BP and Shell made a mistake?
They do what they want, I'm doing what they want, you know? Each person does what he wants. I not comment.
Isn't there a worry to you?
But I don't know why would you say that they are right and we are wrong. It's not a question. For me, it's
because the Russians are slaughtering people in Ukraine.
But again, what is the link between the existing plants? The plants which are there are there. Let's be clear. We don't operate the plants. We have financed the plants. We are not there. They are operated by a Russian company, which can do it without us. So this plant will continue to produce, whatever I'm deciding. So it will continue to produce. I have, by the way, a long-term contract with this plant. The only way for TotalEnergies to exit of long-term contracts is to have the sanction from Europe to use force majeure. This is a reality. And this is a reality for my colleagues, by the way. You can ask to one of my peers if he still operates the LNG contracts on Sakhalin. It's still there. The contract is there. So it changes nothing of the decision. The question is, and by the way, you can write off, I'm not sure my colleagues have managed to find a way to exit. You want me tomorrow to sell for nothing to Russia or to Chinese interests? This is what you want me to do? I mean, so I understand perfectly, and I can tell you the ethics part of OFCAT. And we are absolutely against, and we firmly condemn the aggression of Russia against Ukraine. I have people in Ukraine, I take care of them. I have also people in Russia. But then there is a point where, again, the question is for us, how can we really dismantle this system without being accused in few months or year that we have just given that for nothing to Russian interests, which we are supposed to sanction. And I would like somebody to explain me how I'm doing it, and I would like my colleagues to explain me how they will do it. So again, the question of written off, you know, is just putting that in an exceptional results. It means nothing. The question is, what will be the consequence? Today, it changed. Again, these plants will continue to be run. This production will continue whatever we decide. So this is the most important. So I know the debate at this stage, and we also take actions. By the way, I'm not sure that many of my peers have announced what I've done Tuesday, but we don't purchase anymore oil and diesel from Russia from the end of the year. I've never seen somebody say that and doing it.
So just to confirm, you would not do business with Vladimir Putin again?
No, it's clear.
Anders, I want to bring you in on this as well, because obviously you made the decision to divest, to get out of Russia, as so many other oil and gas companies have decided. Do you think that Patrick and Total Energies, and potentially even the President of France, who refused to answer my question about that this week, could potentially be on the wrong side of history as a result of these decisions?
That is not up to me to decide. You know, when the war in Ukraine started, we saw we couldn't be in Russia anymore, and we announced that we're starting the process to exit on our four JVs. We have made humanitarian help to the Ukrainian people, particularly the refugees, through the Norwegian refugee kind of associations that helping with it. We have started the process, same as other companies. We stopped buying more oil after the decision, and now we're working to exit.
Your Excellency, at the start of this crisis, we were already talking, obviously, about an energy crisis that was occurring as a result of years of lack of investment, underinvestment, if you will. And when Washington called Qatar, made the call, you answered the call in terms of committing to doing whatever was possible to help alleviate this crisis. But I want to ask you about your other or your fellow GCC nations. I'm talking about Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Obviously, these are major oil producers. I'm talking about OPEC, the folks who lead OPEC. They haven't taken a call from Washington. And even though their remit is supposedly to stabilize energy prices, to stabilize the market, I should say, and we saw them doing that during the pandemic, higher prices have not convinced them to make a move, at least not so far. Do you worry about demand destruction? Do you worry about inflation, about what this is actually going to do longer term to the global economy?
I will attempt to answer part of your question because, I mean, the calls from the US to these countries I'm not privy to, so I can't comment on them. But for us, I mean, we're clear about trying to support the Europeans, and the Americans have called us, the Europeans have called us on trying to support, and we have said that the volumes that are divertible away from Europe, even if we can get higher prices for them, we would not divert in solidarity with Europe. So that's very clear. Now, regarding the oil price, I'm not trying to defend the OPEC decision, but I would like you just to look at the numbers. And I think first, probably starting 2015, you saw about a 20% annual decrease in capital expenditure in the oil and gas. And there are two elements to this. People see oil and gas as, opening the valve and closing the valve of production, and you can just bring production up and down. There are two investments. One is investment to just keep the production that you have going. So just to keep, if you're producing 1 million barrels a day, to keep it up and running, you need heavy capital investment in drilling and maintenance and so on. So that has really come down as far as keeping up the current production. Second is bringing new production did not come into the industry, and this is across the board, oil and gas overall worldwide. And then on top of that, you started the pre-COP26 discussion of transition, where there was a lot of attack on oil and gas companies, and you had boards being attacked and so on. And then you saw that 20% annually, and then the COVID hit. So with the COVID, 35% reduction year on year in capex. So really, it's I'd say, a cumulative effect of 6 to 7 years of lack of real capital expenditure that was needed in the oil and gas sector that has caused the shortage and the spike that you're talking about. Now, if I go to the OPEC side, they announce the production of every country that's in OPEC plus, as they call them now, or the two groups. And if you see, with the exception of 1 or 2 countries, month on month, they've agreed to something that I think is very sensible, 400,000 barrels a day of increase, which is quite reasonable, not to shock the market, if you will. This is all pre-Ukraine issue. And I think it was very sensible what they were doing, but the lack of investment coupled with, if you look at the list of the countries, only 2 countries, I believe, and maybe 1 now, that has no capacity, and all of them, with no exception, cannot reach their quota. What does this tell you? It tells you there isn't supply that's available for them to put on the market. If I have supply that's available and I am below my limit in OPEC, and the price of oil is 120, you think I'll stop production? So it's fundamentally an issue of lack of supply that's causing this, and it's not the action of OPEC, in my view, or OPEC plus. I'm not defending them, I'm not part of that group, but I'm just saying these are numbers and these are facts, and numbers don't lie.
Patrick, what about the policymakers in Europe? Because we discussed that a little bit earlier, the policymakers in Europe, and the fundamental disconnect there seems to be between people who understand energy markets and people who don't, and oftentimes the don't are the people that are making the policies, particularly in Europe.
So, you know, I spent quite a lot of time in the recent 3 weeks with the policymakers, the leaders, because they came to us to ask us questions, to give them, for example, the gas markets, can we get rid or not of Russian gas, or what different positions? No, we managed to reconcile. It's true that energy is a complex matter, because everything is interconnected. What's puzzled me is that when I see policymakers, you know, they think we can have a policy in renewable, a policy in gas, a policy on oil, a policy on nuclear, as if all that was not interconnected. In fact, there is one energy which interconnects, it's electricity. And climate change is a matter of molecules and electrons. We will have more and more electricity. And if you want to have a policy which does not integrate, you know, the European leaders have discovered when the gas price is going up, electricity price is going up. Of course, the market is just using the marginal cost. And the marginal cost of electricity in Europe is a CCGT plus CO2. But that is discovered today. And honestly, it's not an easy matter to understand the interconnection. And by the way, this is why we become Total Energies. We move fundamentally from Total oil to Total Energies, including electricity in our portfolio, because we strongly believe that the company will be an energy company, like John Kerry said, which manage oil, gas, and electricity, will be able to derive a lot of value of this interconnection in the market. So that's the complexity. So today, what I'm happy, you know, this week I can't reveal you, I spent 1 hour with 4 CEOs of oil and gas company, with 2 hours with Mrs. van der Leyen, asking us questions about before the council, and even the French president called me during you know, so, I mean, it's good. So, but, you know, we need to make, I think it's really the problem. This energy policy, again, needs to integrate security of supply, climate, and all the energies together. And so the mistake, like I said, is to oppose the energies. To say oil and gas is bad, renewable is good. No, we need to put all that together, and we know that fundamentally we want to go to a system, decarbonized system, with no oil and gas. But it will take time. I was listening, CCS is not bad. A net zero world will require CCS in 2050. This is a famous net zero IES scenario. So we must face the reality. And what I hope from this crisis is having policymakers facing the reality and then working together to find sensible solution. A transition is very complex to manage, but we need the management of the transition, not just axiom, you know. This is good, this is bad. No, it does not work like that.
You said that they came to you this week to ask those questions, Patrick. Do you think that if they'd asked you about energy a little while earlier on, we would be in the mess that we're in now?
I think I would have clearly recommended to them to build some regas terminals in Europe for long and to have gas storage. Because for me, it's obvious, you know. I mean, I think, you know, the famous 2 German terminals, I think I heard about them since I am in Visin 20 years ago. And why didn't we build them? Because there was no visibility, you know? And so I think, yes, we would have probably proposed them to do things. But, you know, at the end, and it's a lesson, by the way, because energy cannot work only on market forces. Because this is what Europe wanted to do, to have a pure market, liberalized market. Unfortunately, you need to have some planning in the system. So you need to have, yes, market forces, but also some sound policies.
I think if I can just say that a while back, if they asked him, they would still listen. They would still hear the story from him. I don't think they would listen. Now they are listening. That's the difference between before and now. So one thing I wanted, since we're in Qatar here, and you talked about the transition, and Secretary Kerry was here. I'd like to just maybe showcase Qatar a little bit in that area, because we've done great work that hasn't been really talked about much. We're a big gas country, of course. We've been working on carbon capture and sequestration since 2008. In 2015, we started the largest CO2 capture and sequestration in the MENA region. We currently, as we speak, anybody could drive 80 kilometers north and visit our carbon capture and sequestration site. We're actually capturing 2.5 million tons per annum of CO2 and sequestering it underground. By the time we have all our expansions in place by 2035, we have a plan till 2035. The expansions will come in 26 to reach 11 million tons of CO2 sequestration. Before the World Cup, hopefully in October, we'll be inaugurating the largest single solar power plant in the center of the country, in the middle of the country, in an area called Al Kharsa'a, which will power, and Total are partners with us in that project also, and that's a solar power plant that will power up to 10% of the country's national grid. And being the largest gas producer and having that, it demonstrates that we're serious about the transition. You can achieve the transition, but you need to do it sensibly. And as Patrick said it very well, you need all the solutions to be working together. And today we're going to be announcing, I shook hands with Secretary Kerry. Qatar is also joining the methane pledge with Secretary Kerry. The reason we didn't actually join it earlier is because we started in 2015. From 15 to 20, the pledge says 30% reduction. We reduced methane, fugitive methane, by 75% from 2015 till 2020. So we're way ahead in that regard. But now we have to do more from now till 2030. So I just wanted to showcase what we've been doing here.
Yeah, I just want to also to bring in that we all share the same goal. We all want to get to net zero. We have the energy trilemma we need to solve together. But also, how do we do that? And I think sometimes we are focusing on setting new targets. We have climate targets. We have no energy security targets. And also someone would like to set price targets as well. But what we really need to do is to make sure that the collaboration between industry, between governments, between consumers, investors actually take place. We see now a more deglobalized world. And, if we want to scale up renewables, we need minerals, we need metal from different parts of the world. And that's equally important. If we don't want a food crisis, we also need kind of a globalized world where trade is actually moving freely, such that we can make the fertilizers and to have the farmland growing, and then technology. 50% of the technology needed to do and come to net zero is not yet developed and implemented, and that's a hard task we're going to do going forward. Here also collaboration is important. And my last point, industrialization. Oil and gas and coal is a massive industry, and we're going to replace that. That will require massive investment, but a massive creation of new industry jobs. And it's a big, big task, and we can only do it if we are able to create peace in the world and collaboration and nations talking to others and not fighting.
Speaking of peace in the world, just before we wrap it up, when I spoke with Vladimir Putin in October of last year, I asked him the question on everyone's mind at that time, which was, are you using energy as a weapon? And I posed that to you gentlemen today in the sense that it is clear that amongst many of his weapons, Vladimir Putin was also using energy to damage the West, and frankly, now we see the global economy. Do you believe that his strategy has been successful? Everybody.
I'm not sure I've understood the question. By the way, in this story, there is a supplier, Russia. There is a customer, Europe. So the question, if he did not force us as well to take his gas. That's true that we created a situation where we are dependent on them. Why? Because it was a low-cost gas. So it's a lesson for all of us. And again, why? Because in fact, the more I'm looking to my triangle, you know what dominates the triangle? It is a price. Energy is a fundamental mean of our economy and of life. And today, why do we have crisis in Europe with all the people? Because gasoline is high, gas is high, electricity is high, because we damage their purchasing power. And so I think our society, for long, and particularly in Europe, where our major fight was against inflation, we favored the lowest cost energy, which is just what is happening around the planet. We begin to impact that with climate, and now energy security of supply has a cost. And the real question which is asked to us, how much are we ready to pay for the cost of energy security without Russia? So, yes, we created a sort of monster, but on both sides, you know. And I think, I attended the meeting where you were invited.
I know you did.
Yeah, and I will tell you, for me that day, I remarked, which I was very puzzled, Vladimir Putin knew everything about the European gas market. And I had over experience. It was the first time that I discovered that. So I think, yes, probably, he learned a lot and he discovered that this relationship could be used for, I would say, these Machiavelli plans that we, unfortunately, are all facing today. But we have a lot of lessons to be driven from that on many issues, but it has a cost. And climate will have a cost, security will have a cost. And so how do we, policymakers, convince people to accept to pay for these two costs? That's for me, I'm not a political leader. I'm just taking care of my company. My duty is to find the best fields in the world, the best plants in the world, to produce at the lowest cost possible. And this is why I'm in love with Saad and Qatar, because this takes place here, you know?
You heard it here first. Gentlemen, I'll let you go. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much to the audience.
Thank you to all our panelists. Thank you, Hadley, for this conversation, no doubt. And as we all might have expected, the crisis in and over Ukraine looms large over this forum, and it will be the focus of our next session. A newsmaker interview with one of the youngest members of the government in Ukraine, a young journalist turned politician who speaks passionately at every forum about the need to find a solution to the crisis her country is going through. Someone who, like millions of her fellow Ukrainians, refuses to see herself as a victim of what she and so many others believe are the inhumane attacks against her country. Please welcome to the stage the first Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Emine Zaparova, and CNN's Becky Anderson will be conducting the interview.
Hello, everybody. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you very much indeed to our hosts. What a start to the 20th edition of this forum. I'm so impressed at the lineup and at those who are attending, not least Emine, who is with me today. How are you?
Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakat. Greetings from Ukraine, actually. And this is exactly the question that I stand with, because it's quite difficult to really explain how I am. I've been in my country for a month, hiding in the bomb shelters. My first day in MFA, when the war started, I spent in the bomb shelter. Then I left from Kiev and I went to another more safe place, but still every day when you spend hours in the bomb shelter and when you fall asleep and you really don't know, honestly, you don't know if you will be alive next morning. And then the first thing that you do right when you are awake and you just go into your cell phone and check if your beloved ones are okay, you know, just go into WhatsApp and seeing what was the last time when they were online. And this is the feeling that I had, and now I'm here. So the energy is drastically different. There is no war. I spent 5 hours in my first class plane from Warsaw to Doha. I was eating my lobster and I felt guilt. I felt guilt because my people are there and thousands of Ukrainians, and I'm very honest, I'm very frank saying this. It's difficult to reflect on this because it's very personal. But I felt guilt because people there in Mariupol have no water, have no food, and these are thousands, and children have been buried in the backyards. And I'm here sitting in my first class, coming here, but then, you know, I just recovered. I took myself in hands and I said to myself that I came here to message and I came here to tell the story of my country, of my people, and this is really important, I believe. And I'm very thankful to Doha Forum and to the State of Qatar for this invitation.
And it's Emily, it's so important that you are here, and I know that everybody in this room wants to hear where you think things are at. You've just described the situation on the ground. It's awful. Where are we at and where are we going is what we need to talk about today. Your appointment in 2020 as Deputy Foreign Minister was historic. You are a Crimean Tatar woman appointed, as I understand it, exactly 76 years after the forced deportation of that Muslim minority group. Your lens is unique and important. President Zelensky addressing this audience today, making clear how Muslims in Ukraine will be fighting Russian aggression during the month of Ramadan. Just give us a snapshot. You've reflected on your own personal feelings about what is going on. Just get us a snapshot of what you understand to be the situation on the ground at present.
The war is really an awful thing. It's a tragedy. It's a personal tragedy, and it's a collective tragedy. And of course, we've been living for years before 2014 in this brotherhood paradigm when we've been actually assured to stay safe when we get rid of nuclear weaponry in 1994. But then 2014 happened, actually, and I lived in Crimea as a Crimean Tatar. It's a Sunni Muslim entity that went through this awful history of deportation, of exile, when, as the result of this deportation, half of Crimean Tatars just died physically, and then decades during the Soviet period, they were fighting as dissidents for the right to live in their homeland, and right after the collapse of Soviet Union, they started to come back to Crimea, and then in 2014, again, Russia came, occupied the territory, and the first thing that they did, they started oppressing the indigenous population by squeezing out loyal to Ukraine Crimean Tatars, by bringing hundreds of thousands of Russian people to the Crimean Peninsula, and then back in 2014, when I decided that I could not handle with Russian rubles, that I could not live under the Russian flag, and I took my decision to go to Kiev and to fight for my people, I thought that this was the worst, but it was not, you know? I thought that COVID is the worst, but it's not, because when you have the war, COVID is not acute anymore, and this is the reality again. So again, you know, going back to your question, what is the snapshot? So I believe that when the country is being cynically occupied in 2014, and my main message that I also, by the way, delivered during the first panel discussion about misinformation is that, look, we have to be very frank and honest with each other when we try to assess the situation. And my assessment says that we are dealing not with a partner, not with a country that you can talk to, or you can deliver an argument or a fact. It's a perverted and maniacal way of thinking, because when the neighboring country has been attacked by using phosphor bombs, by using airstrike missiles, by bombing the maternity houses, schools, orphanages, ambulances, and civilian dwellings. This is about perversive way of action. And if we think that by negotiating with Russia, by trying to dance tango with an aggressor, we will appease Putin, I think that we're all mistaken. And I will take you back to the Second World War, to the edge of the Second World War, when Hitler, same, maniac, I would say, and I'm very sorry for this comparison, but it's very evident for me. When same maniac Hitler, when he made the Anschluss of Austria, and the whole world allowed it to happen. And then the occupation of Sudetenland, which is the part of Czechoslovakia, and the world made up and came up with the Munich Peace Accord. And just in a year, the Second World War started. And this try and attempt to appease Hitler did not work out. It just gave a bit more time. So the same we have. I really think that Crimea and Donbass for Putin in 2014 is absolutely the same that we had with Sudetenland and Austria for Hitler. So my message is that if we were not able to stop aggression and evil as such, as a nature in 2014, and if it's not stopped, it's bigger. And this war that we have in Ukraine is fully direct consequence of that, our inability of 2014. And let us think further. If we are not able to stop this war in Ukraine, what will be the next step? If we think that we can dance tango with Putin, I think that we are wrong.
Emily, what do you make of what was a top Russian general's remarks just yesterday, claiming the, quote, first stage of Russia's military plan is now complete? Their primary focus, he says, is now centered on eastern Ukraine. What are the consequences if that is Russia's strategy at this point? And do you buy what's being said at this point? The first phase is over.
I don't, absolutely. I know for sure that their initial plan of Russia was to take control over Ukraine in 3 days. It's called Blitzkrieg. It's, again, same parallel as we had with Nazi Germany. So the initial calculation and military calculation was that Ukrainian people will be happy, meeting President Putin with salt and bread, putting the red carpet in front of the Russian troops, but it's not. It's a huge miscalculation because hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians are ready to fight, are not ready to step back, and they are not ready to compromise. This is what we have. This is our reality and the moods.
How long can they go on?
And then the other issue is that if they have not accomplished their initial military plans, they are now regrouping. We can see that they are now trying to reconsider their positions. So we believe that their tactics so far goes to the occupation of the south and east of my country. Approximately 14 cities already are under occupation. The Kherson, which is on the border with Crimea, they have already started to launch the new project of so-called Kherson People Republic, same that we had in Donbass and Luhansk region, Donetsk and Luhansk region. So I think that their tactics so far goes to this occupation of the eastern and southern part, and also the main and the most important, I believe, that also for Gulf countries because of the food security. I mean, we have Black Sea and Azov Sea, Mariupol ports at the Sea of Azov and Black Sea Odessa. So their tactics is actually to cut us off from the access to sea. But the thing is that half of wheat that you eat actually comes from Ukraine. And if we will not be able to bring and to deliver these wheat, cereals and other things, and oil, sunflower oil, what actually can we speak about and what kind of food security we can speak about? So I think that this is the main thing that we have to consider.
I want to talk about two things here. I want to talk about talks and what is going on as you understand it, because there's some confusion on what has been achieved, if anything, whether there is any prospect of an agreement at present. These are the talks between Ukraine and Russia. I also want to talk about what you believe was achieved, if anything, last week in Brussels. Let's do the talks first. As one of Zelensky's top foreign policy officials, what is your understanding of where those talks are at? And what are the red lines as far as Ukraine is concerned? Let's be quite categorically clear about this.
President Zelensky, who is today an embodiment of courage and bravery of my nation, he many times stressed and vocalized that he will never compromise the very principle and the very core of international law, territorial integrity and sovereignty. And I believe, really, I mean, it's not about compromising, it's about just being on the ground. And the thing is that the way how Russians perceive it, the way how Russians negotiate, I would say so, or how they are trying to make a deal is always on the cost of vital interests of Ukraine. So you have two options. Either you follow the Russian line or nothing is there. So what we have so far, these are the frame that was actually suggested by Russia. We have our own frame. So now the groups, we have two groups actually, the Belarusian group, which is the Russian-Ukrainian groups of negotiators, and then the other one that goes under the mediation of the Turkish Republic, namely Minister Çavuşoğlu, whom I met today this morning, and we also discussed our potentials, I would say. So this is to bring together these frames and just to check up if there is a potential. But again, as my president said, as my minister many times stresses, that we are committed to the peaceful resolution. I mean, it's normal, it's logical. Look, it's like if there are two countries, Russia is the largest country in the world, it's the second army in the world, and I think it's insane to think that Ukraine wants to fight. And the hybrid narrative is there, that they are taking a special operation. So Russia claims that it's not a war, that they are having a special operation cleansing Ukraine from Nazis and fascists, saving Ukrainians from Nazis and fascists, but this is just a coverage. But at the sense, and as the core of this war and of this crime is actually the very question of our existence. Remember, President Putin had a long speech in a week before the war when he came with this historical context, explaining many things, and I think it was at that very moment when I saw his eyes, I knew that the war would start. So this was my personal moment of understanding. And today, if we see how they negotiate, I believe it's quite difficult to find any kind of resolution, because if the option is either to step back or to compromise your vital interests as territorial integrity, or nothing. So it's a question that everyone can ask. And I believe that, again, as far as we're trying to open up every single window that is there, we've been requesting many countries, including Turkey, including Israel. Prime Minister Bennett has also performed certain efforts. I know that some of the other world leaders also suggested their mediation. But again, we have to understand that at the other side, there is this wall named Russia. And this wall is something that you cannot push neither left or right, because they have their own perception of life and their own perception of war. And the question is for everyone, if it's possible to compromise.
Is Ukraine prepared to compromise on the future status of Crimea and the Donbass regions?
It's a very difficult question, but my president vocalized the answer to this question many times. He said that international law is important, rule-based order is important, and territorial integrity is the very basis and the very fundament of international law. So if someone suggests or thinks that we can compromise this issue, it means that we have no right for existence. And you know, the other thing that I really want to say, look, when the war started, everyone thought that Ukrainians would give up. This did not happen. We really had a huge line of Ukrainian men wanting to join the territorial defense units. I mean, these are thousands of people. We have over 100,000 of Ukrainian men wanting to join this territorial defense unit, which means that they are not ready to give up. And then any leadership is actually stuck between Russian position, which is very bold, you either take it or not, and then the population and the overwhelming majority of Ukrainian population is not ready to, let's say, compromise this very core of international law. My president actually raised the issue of referendum, so it's kind of today under consideration, I would say, but again, because of the martial law, because of the war, it's quite difficult to understand what is the technical way to have any kind of referendum. So again, for today, the mood is very concrete, is very frank, that people are not ready to give up. And for us, it's whether you win or you lose.
The problem is, isn't it, that there need to be some sort of concrete steps taken in the short term in order to provide some opportunity for long-term peace. Turkey's president has said that he will urge Vladimir Putin to make, and I quote him here, an honorable exit from Ukraine by becoming a, quote, architect of peace, the architect of a peace deal with Kyiv. Is that possible at this point?
Could you clarify the question? Possible the peace deal?
Is it possible that Vladimir Putin could make an honorable exit from Ukraine at this point? To your mind?
Look, again, Russian position was kind of grounded on huge miscalculation. They really thought that they would take control over Ukraine in 2-3 days. They were mistaken, dramatically mistaken. Over 15,000 Russian soldiers already have been killed on the Ukrainian soil. The second miscalculation that they did, they thought that the world would do nothing, that the same, repeat of 2014 would happen, that they will just occupy the territories, and again, this kind of few sanctions would be performed, but it's not. Look, have you ever seen this unprecedented level of unity that we see today, especially in the Western world? Over 200 international companies left the Russian market. 7 banks already switched off from the SWIFT banking system. Many countries have already performed full embargo on oil and gas. The sky has been closed for Russian airplanes, and this is something that they have been miscalculated. So my answer to your question actually goes that it's not possible to answer a question directly, because it will depend on the continuation of this unity and pressure on Russia, because their position should be kind of deterred, and their aggression should be deterred by this unity.
And that leads me to my next question, which is an extremely important one. Both NATO and EU leaders met in Brussels. It was a frenetic week of sort of extraordinary summits last week. From your perspective, what was achieved? And perhaps more importantly, what wasn't?
President Zelensky gave a very strong speech in front of the NATO leaders. Again, in a very frank manner, we had this whole conversation about membership in NATO. This foreign policy goal is enshrined in our constitution. We are frank saying so, that we want to be a member of European Union and NATO, and this is for us not only the statistics that the majority of population supports this issue, but also an issue of civilization choice, whether we are with the Western world or whether we are with this, barbaric Soviet world and the Russian world that we don't want to live in. When President Zelensky said that, okay, for Ukraine, because we had 1994 Budapest Memorandum, it was unprecedented will when Ukraine got rid of nuclear weaponry. We said no to nuclear weaponry. We made our contribution to this global architecture of peace, and we were guaranteed and we were assured to have guarantees, and it did not work out. We had 2014, and Russia, which was among those countries to safeguard our guarantees, they attacked us. And we didn't have NATO in our constitution in 2014, and it didn't help us. So being beyond any kind of block didn't help us to safeguard ourselves. So my president, again, is very open, saying that let us reconsider, because we believe that international institutions, they don't have instruments to respond, because Russia is a permanent member of Security Council, and with one veto right they can stop everything, and they do it. I mean, they use it constantly. So the question is, what actually can be performed as a draft of these security guarantees? So we believe that it's P5 plus 2 countries, Germany and Turkey, and then there could be an agreement signed, and that the countries would assign to this agreement. And the logic behind would be the same logic that Article 5 of NATO Alliance Charter has, meaning that in case if Ukraine will be attacked, so these countries will have to protect Ukraine. So this is something that is now under consideration, discussion, as the suggestion of my country to have, well, not as an alternative, but at least understanding that NATO membership is a distance and there is no consensus among NATO countries, so we can suggest this frame.
On the ground, what do you make of Poland's suggestion of NATO boots on the ground in Ukraine as peacekeepers? And is there any sense from you, from your president, that that is something that NATO would consider in any way, shape or form? Certainly the big message from Joe Biden, from the NATO head, from most countries in NATO is that there's no NATO activity in the air, no NATO activity on the ground. Are these peacekeepers something that you believe, one, could be considered, and two, is conceivable?
again, in a very frank manner, the question is that is there a scare? There is. Everyone is afraid of global war. Everyone is afraid of Third World War. Messages that we receive from NATO leaders, including President Biden, are about not willing to have this war and a will to kind of try to find formula, not to have this war. But again, do we understand who Putin is? Do we understand that Putin is Hitler? Do we understand that by negotiating different formats, we actually, would not escape something that he has already in mind? When phosphor bombs, cover Ukrainian cities, when they hit schools and hospitals, this means something. And then if we go requesting, NATO countries to close the sky, and then, because we understand that our people are dying because of the bombs that are coming from the sky, and in this, absence of will to be perceived as, the countries that can support Ukraine, and thus Russia may be triggered to the world war, I think it's not the logic that should be followed here. The logic that should be followed here is actually the assessment of reality, that Putin is a pure evil, and you cannot balance with the pure evil. And then how long can actually the world witness the massacres that we have in Ukraine?
President Zelensky was chiding the West this week for being, as he described it, a little too late. It's clear that many in the West didn't see this coming. Should they have done? And at this point, the clear concern is about any sense that this war will spill over. This is concerned by the West, that this war will spill over into any NATO countries, and the use of chemical weapons, which you're suggesting are already being used by the Russians, and the potential fear of nuclear weapons. Should the West have seen this?
No one knows what's going to happen. This is true. But everyone knows, and my country knows, what Russia is today. I think this is enough to at least understand that the red lines have already been crossed. Russian soldiers have been taking antidotes for chemical and biological weapons. Does it mean that they may perform biological weapons and chemical weapons soon? I think yes. I mean, because we understand, I reflected today, this morning, a couple of days ago, I bought a coffee in one of the coffee shops, only the one that is available in the place where I stay. And I was just walking with this coffee, once, I think in the month, I allowed myself to spend 10 minutes outside. And I've been listening to people talking, and I've heard teenager girls discussing biological and chemical weapon, like they were 12, 13-year-old girls, and I was really shocked. So it's really the truth that we can be under this attack because of the intelligence service say that Russian soldiers are having their antidotes. But the question, if this is happening, what will be the response of the Western world? And again, this goes to my previous notion that how long the leadership of countries will observe these massacres. And then the other thing is happening. Look, societies, people living in Western countries, they are pushing their governments from within to ban Russian, gas and oil, because when you sanction from one hand Russia, but from another hand you pay millions of euros for oil and gas, so it's a detonating thing. And then the other thing, I mean, look, as far as there is any formula, no one knows exactly how to treat this situation. Everyone is scared of having the war, but I believe that something that was not an option a couple of weeks ago today is something that Western world demonstrates. So I think that the logic is a step-by-step logic. And I believe, and I again, it's my subjective feeling that we will not escape the scenarios that are beyond the scenario that we have. And it's only a matter of time and understanding. And our message is, our aim and our will is to deliver this message just for understanding that evil cannot be compromised.
You're here at the Doha Forum today. We've run out of time, but I just want to put this last question to you. This is a meeting of some of the world's top diplomatic officials, some extremely important influences sit here. We've heard from the president of your country appealing for support. There will be representatives here whose countries haven't been as forthright in their support for the action taken to support your country. What is your message on behalf of Ukraine, on behalf of its future, on behalf of the people of Ukraine? And if you are concerned about this grinding on, how much worse does it get at this point?
More than 91% of Ukrainian people have a strong belief that we will win. These are the numbers that came from the survey a week ago. Really, world is not 100% united in perception of what we have. But I think that it's quite evident the evil that we have. And as Ambassador Carpenter and one of the forums just mentioned, that this is the war between evil and good. I believe this is the war between evil and good, and I believe that my country is on the right side. This gives us spirit, and this is something that you can see when you see Ukrainian people stop Russian tanks with bare hands. And my message probably will go to Muslim world, as I am a Muslim, and I know that in some of the Muslim countries, especially Gulf countries, Russian media is very active. Russian diplomats are very active in trying to deliver their own message. I will probably give a quotation of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who said that Muslim is the one who gives security to the other one by his tongue and his hands. This means this is a message of responsibility. So I believe this is about responsibility of not only the Western world, but also the other countries that cannot compromise the evil. And just to stop, we cannot dance tango with an aggressor. We have to understand this.
With that, we'll leave it there. We thank you very much indeed for joining us today.
An unwavering message of resilience, of defiance, of steadfastness. Thank you very much to the Deputy Foreign Minister of Ukraine. Thank you, Becky, for this great conversation. A perfect place to end, at least for an hour or so, to take a break once again here at the Doha Forum. We will meet back here at 5 p.m. We'll have 2 newsmaker interviews, one with the Foreign Minister of Turkey and the other with the man who is tasked with delivering the 2022 FIFA World Cup here in Qatar, which is less than 8 months away. We'll also have a panel discussion on what next for Afghanistan, looking at the legacy of Western nations and their role moving ahead. We'll see you back here at 5 p.m.